The baby stopped breathing in her arms. Grace Holloway stood in the middle of Highway 83 ice, cutting her face like broken glass, and felt her 7-month-old daughter go limp against her chest. No heartbeat. No movement. Nothing. Behind her, 3 children screamed into the wind. Ahead of her, only white death stretched for miles. Then headlights cut through the storm. Motorcycles. A man in leather walked toward her through the blizzard. He looked at the baby. He looked at her face. And he said 2 words that would change everything. Subscribe to our channel and follow this story to the end. Comment your city below so we can see how far this story travels. Grace's fingers had stopped working 20 minutes ago. She knew this because she kept trying to check the baby's pulse, and her hands would not obey. The cold had taken them first. Now it was taking everything else. "Mama Lily isn't moving," Ruby's voice cut through the wind. 12 years old. Old enough to know what death looked like. Old enough to understand that her baby sister had just stopped fighting. Grace pressed her palm against Lily's chest. Nothing. She pressed harder. Still nothing. "No," Grace whispered. "No, no, no." She dropped to her knees in the snow. The twins screamed behind her. Mason and Carter, 8 years old, watching their mother fall apart in the middle of a frozen highway. "Mama, get up!" Ruby grabbed her shoulder. "Mama, we have to keep moving. She's not breathing." Grace's voice broke. "Ruby, she's not breathing." Ruby's face changed. The fear that had been building for 2 hours finally cracked through her brave mask. "Do something! Mama, do something!" Grace ripped open her coat. Her fingers fumbled with the baby's blankets. Lily's face was gray. Her lips were blue. Her tiny body lay still against Grace's chest like a doll someone had thrown away. "Come on, baby." Grace tilted Lily's head back. She covered the tiny mouth and nose with her own mouth. She breathed. Once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. "Please." Grace was crying now. The tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. "Please, God, please," she breathed again. Her lungs burned from the cold. The wind screamed around her like something alive and hungry. The twins had stopped crying. They stood frozen, watching their mother try to bring their sister back from the dead. Ruby knelt beside her. "Mama, let me help. What do I do? I don't know." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know." She breathed into Lily's mouth again. Her hands shook so badly she could barely hold the baby's head steady. The world had narrowed to this one moment, this one tiny body, this one desperate prayer. Then she heard them. Engines. Low and heavy cutting through the wind like thunder trapped underground. Ruby's head snapped up. "Someone's coming." Grace didn't look. She couldn't look away from Lily's face. She breathed again. Once more. "Please, God, just one more chance." Headlights sliced through the white wall of snow. 2 beams, then 4, then 8. They moved together slow but steady, fighting the storm, with something that looked almost like purpose. "Motorcycles," Ruby said. Her voice trembled. "Mama, it's motorcycles." Grace finally looked up. Through the blur of tears and ice, she saw shapes emerging from the white darkness. Massive machines with riders hunched against the wind. Leather jackets, patches on their chests. Her blood went cold for reasons that had nothing to do with the weather. "Ruby, take your brothers." "What? Take Mason and Carter and get behind me. Now!" Ruby didn't argue. She grabbed the twins and pulled them close. The three children pressed against their mother's back, while Grace clutched Lily against her chest. The lead bike stopped 10 feet away. The engine died. A massive figure swung off the seat and pulled the helmet from his head. Grace's breath caught in her throat. He was enormous, 6'4" at least, with shoulders like a bull and a beard already filling with ice. His leather jacket was covered in patches she didn't recognize, but one patch she knew. One patch everyone knew. Hell's Angels. The man's eyes found her, then the children huddled behind her, then the bundle in her arms. He started walking toward her. "Stay back." Grace's voice came out weak, broken by cold and fear. "Please just stay back." The man stopped. He looked at her face. He saw the terror there, the desperate courage of a mother who would die before letting anyone hurt her children. "Ma'am?" His voice was deep rough, but somehow gentle. "Is that baby breathing?" Grace's resolve cracked. The question broke something inside her that she had been holding together by pure will. "No," she whispered. No, she stopped. She stopped, and I can't. The man moved. Faster than someone his size should be able to move. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides and dropped to his knees in the snow beside her. "How long?" "I don't know. 2 minutes, maybe 3. "You been doing CPR?" "I've been trying. I can't feel my hands. I don't know if I'm doing it right." The man looked at her. His eyes were gray like the storm itself, but there was something in them that Grace hadn't expected. Something that looked almost like recognition. "I'm going to help your baby," he said. "That's all I'm going to do. You understand?" Grace nodded. She didn't have the strength to do anything else. The man reached out. His massive hands were surprisingly gentle as he took Lily from her arms. He cradled the baby against his chest and tilted her head back. "Come on, little one," he murmured. "Come on back." He breathed into Lily's mouth. Short, careful breaths. The other bikers had gathered around them now, creating a wall against the wind. Grace couldn't see their faces through the ice and snow, but she could feel them watching. The man breathed again and again. His fingers pressed against Lily's tiny chest, pumping with a rhythm that spoke of training of experience. "Deacon," he called without looking up. "Get over here." Another man pushed through the circle. Younger, leaner, with a face that might have been handsome if it wasn't carved from ice and exhaustion. "What do you need, Hawk?" "Blankets, whatever we've got. And get those kids warmed up before they go into shock." Deacon moved. Others moved with him. Grace felt hands on her shoulders, someone wrapping something around her. Ruby's voice somewhere behind her saying, "Mama, they're helping us." But Grace couldn't look away from Lily. The big man Hawk was still breathing for her baby, still pressing his fingers against her chest. His face was focused intense like nothing else in the world existed except this one small life. "Come on," he whispered. "Come on, sweetheart. Fight for me." 30 seconds passed. 40. Grace felt something inside her dying with each moment of silence. Then Lily coughed. A tiny sound barely audible over the wind, but it hit Grace like an earthquake. Lily coughed again, then gasped, then let out a cry that was the most beautiful thing Grace had ever heard. "There you go." Hawk's voice cracked, just slightly, just enough for Grace to notice. "There you go, little fighter." He looked up at Grace. Their eyes met, and for one moment the storm and the cold and the fear all disappeared. "She's breathing," he said. "She's okay." Grace's body gave out. The strength that had kept her walking for 2 hours kept her standing when her legs screamed at her to stop, simply evaporated. She pitched forward, and Hawk caught her with one arm while still cradling Lily in the other. "I've got you," he said. "I've got both of you." Grace Holloway had been running for 3 weeks. Running from debt collectors. Running from lawyers. Running from a man who wanted to take everything she had left in this world. She had told herself she could do this alone. She had told herself she didn't need anyone's help. She had told herself that trusting strangers was what got women like her killed. But here, in the middle of a blizzard, held up by a man with angel patches on his jacket and blood on his hands from saving her daughter's life, Grace finally let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to fight alone anymore. "My children," she whispered. "Please, my children." "They're safe." Hawk's voice was steady. "Look." Grace turned her head. Through the blur of tears, she saw Ruby sitting on a motorcycle wrapped in a leather jacket 3 sizes too big with Mason on one side and Carter on the other. A biker with a gray beard was kneeling in front of them, checking their fingers for frostbite, speaking to them, in a voice too low for Grace to hear. They were scared. They were cold. But they were alive. "We need to move," Hawk said. "Can't stay here. Storm's getting worse." "There's nowhere to go." Grace's voice was hollow. "We're 20 miles from anything." "There's somewhere." Hawk looked back at the other bikers. "Bull, you remember where Walter's place is?" A massive man with tattoos covering his neck nodded. 12 miles up County Road 7, old gas station." "He's still there. Last I heard." Hawk nodded. He looked down at Grace, then at the baby in his arms, then at the children huddled on the motorcycles. "Can you hold on to me if I put you on my bike?" Grace almost laughed. The idea seemed absurd. Her legs didn't work. Her arms barely worked. She could barely hold her head up. "I don't think I can." "Then we'll figure something out." Hawk whistled sharply. "Razor, bring the sidecar over." Another bike pulled up. This one had a small enclosed compartment attached to the side, barely big enough for one person. "Get her and the baby in there," Hawk ordered. "Seal it tight. Deacon, you're carrying the oldest girl. Bull, the twins. Everyone else formation around us. We move slow, we move together. We don't stop for anything." Grace felt herself being lifted. The sidecar was cramped and smelled like oil and leather, but it was out of the wind. Someone tucked blankets around her and placed Lily against her chest. "Keep her warm," Hawk said through the small window. "Keep her close. We'll be there in 20 minutes if the roads hold." "Why are you doing this?" The question came out before Grace could stop it. 3 weeks of running, 3 weeks of everyone telling her she was on her own, 3 weeks of learning that help always came with a price. Hawk looked at her. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then he reached through the window and brushed a strand of frozen hair from her face. "Because someone should have done it for me," he said. "A long time ago, and they didn't." He pulled back and closed the window. Grace heard his voice, muffled but clear. "Move out. Keep it tight." The convoy began to move. Grace pressed her face against the glass and watched the other bikes fall into formation around them. Somewhere out there, her other children were riding through the storm with strangers who wore patches that should have terrified her. But they had saved Lily. They had wrapped her children in their own jackets. They were risking their lives to get her family to shelter. Maybe everything she thought she knew about the world was wrong. The storm raged around them. The wind screamed and the ice fell and the temperature dropped toward something unsurvivable. But inside the sidecar, wrapped in borrowed blankets, Grace Holloway held her breathing daughter and let herself feel something she hadn't felt in months. Hope. It was fragile. It was small. It might not survive what was coming. But it was there, burning in her chest, like a tiny flame, refusing to die. The baby moved against her, a small hand reaching up, touching her chin. "I'm here, Lily," Grace whispered. "Mama's here." And somewhere ahead, through miles of frozen highway and walls of white death, a group of bikers rode toward shelter, carrying a family they had never met, to safety they didn't have to provide. Vincent Hawk Morrow had been riding for 32 years. He had crossed the country 8 times. He had seen storms that would make this one look like a spring shower. He had buried friends, made enemies, and built a life that most people would never understand. None of that mattered right now. Right now, all that mattered was the woman in the sidecar and the children on the bikes behind him. 4 kids, 1 mother, 1 baby who had stopped breathing and come back like a miracle wrapped in dirty blankets. The wind tried to push him off the road. He leaned into it and kept moving. "Hawk," Deacon's voice came through the radio in his helmet. "The girl's asking questions." "What kind of questions?" "Wants to know who we are, where we're taking them, if we're going to hurt her mother." Hawk's jaw tightened. "What did you tell her?" "Told her we're the people who stop when no one else does. Told her we're taking them somewhere warm. Told her if anyone tries to hurt her mother, they'll have to go through all of us first." "How'd she take that?" "She said that's what the last person said. Then she stopped talking." Hawk didn't respond, but something in his chest twisted. Someone had made promises to this family before. Someone had broken them. He didn't know the story yet. He didn't need to. The fear in that woman's eyes, the bruises he had seen on the older girl's arms, the way the mother had positioned herself between her children and the bikers, like she expected to die fighting. Someone had hurt these people. Someone had made them run. Someone had chased them into a blizzard that should have killed them. Hawk had been that person once. A long time ago, before Emma, before everything changed. He had been the thing that mothers warned their daughters about. Now he was something else. The road curved ahead. Hawk leaned into the turn and felt the bike respond like an extension of his body. Behind him, the convoy moved as 19 bikes carrying 6 souls through a storm that wanted all of them dead. "Hawk," Bull's voice this time. "Twins are falling asleep. Keep them awake. Hypothermia makes you drowsy." "I know, but they're 8 years old and they just watched their baby sister die and come back. They're exhausted." "Then talk to them. Tell them a story. Sing them a song. I don't care what you do, just keep them conscious." "Copy that." Hawk checked his mirrors. The convoy was holding formation tight and disciplined despite the conditions. These men had ridden together for years. They knew how to move as a unit, how to protect what needed protecting. Most people saw the patches and assumed the worst. Criminals. Outlaws. Dangerous men who did dangerous things. They weren't entirely wrong. Hawk had done things he would never talk about. Things that kept him awake at night even now, 20 years later. Things that had earned him his name and his position and the respect of men who didn't give respect easily. But that wasn't who he was anymore. That wasn't who any of them were. The Hells Angels had chapters that did bad things. Hawk knew that. The news made sure everyone knew that. But his chapter, the Nebraska Riders, had made different choices. They ran toy drives at Christmas. They escorted children to school when bullies threatened them. They sat with families at hospitals when no one else would. And sometimes when the world tried to kill someone who didn't deserve to die, they rode into the storm and carried them to safety. The gas station appeared through the snow like a ghost. Hawk saw the shape first. Low building, single-pump windows, dark and covered with ice. Then he saw the light. A small lamp in one window, barely visible, but definitely there. "Someone's home," Razor said through the radio. "Walter never left." Hawk slowed his bike as they approached. He'll help us. Just let me do the talking." The convoy pulled into the lot and stopped. Hawk dismounted first, his boots crunching in the snow. He walked toward the door, already rehearsing what he would say. The door opened before he reached it. A small figure stood in the doorway. 73-years-old Chinese-American with a face carved from decades of hard winters and harder choices. Walter Chen looked at Hawk, then at the convoy behind him, then at the sidecar with its precious cargo. "Vincent," Walter's voice was calm. "What did you bring me?" "A family, woman and 4 kids. Baby almost died on the highway. We need shelter until the storm passes." Walter was silent for a moment. Then he stepped back and held the door open. "Bring them in, all of them. I'll start the generator." Hawk turned and signaled to the others. Men began moving immediately, carrying children from bikes, helping Grace out of the sidecar, creating a chain of bodies and blankets from the cold outside to the warmth inside. Grace stumbled as she stepped through the door. Hawk caught her arm. "Easy. You're safe now." "Where are we?" Her voice was hoarse, barely audible. "Safe," Hawk repeated. "That's all that matters." Walter's gas station hadn't been a gas station in 20 years. The pumps were dead, the tanks empty, the sign so faded you could barely read it. But the building itself was warm. The generator hummed in the back room. Space heaters glowed orange against the walls. "Get them by the heaters," Walter ordered. "Not too close. You warm them too fast, you'll shock their systems." Grace sat down with Lily still pressed against her chest. Ruby appeared beside her with the twins, all 3 children immediately clustering around their mother like she was the only solid thing in a liquid world. "Are we going to be okay?" Mason asked. His voice was small, scared, nothing like the rough and tumble boy he usually pretended to be. "Yes," Grace said. "We're going to be okay." She didn't know if it was true. She didn't know if anything was true anymore, but she said it anyway because that's what mothers did. They lied to protect their children even when the lie might break them both. Hawk crouched down in front of her. "Ma'am, I need to ask you something." Grace tensed. Here it was. The price. The favor. The thing that made all of this make sense. "What is it?" "The bruises on your daughter's arms. The ones that aren't from tonight." Grace's blood went cold. She looked at Ruby, who immediately pulled her sleeves down over her wrists. "That's none of your business." "You're right." Hawk's voice was gentle, but firm. "It's not. But someone gave her those bruises, and I'm guessing that same someone is the reason you were driving through a blizzard with 4 kids and no winter gear. I said it's none of your business. And I heard you." Hawk stood up. "I'm not going to push, but I want you to know something." He looked around the room. 9 bikers stood against the walls, watching, waiting. "Whatever you're running from," Hawk said, "it's not going to follow you in here. You understand, whatever you're afraid of, it stops at that door." Grace wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there was somewhere in the world where Richard Holloway's reach didn't extend, where his lawyers and his money and his connections couldn't touch her. But she had believed that before. She had believed David would protect her. She had believed the police would help. She had believed that if she just told the truth, someone would listen. They never did. They never would. Richard was a county commissioner with friends in every courthouse in the state. Grace was a widow with no money and no proof, and a story that sounded like paranoid delusion. "You don't know what I'm running from," she said quietly. "No," Hawk agreed. "I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone's been running too long. I know what it looks like when the fear's so deep, it's become part of who you are." He pulled a chair over and sat down across from her. "My daughter died 15 years ago. Her name was Molly. She was 7. Grace looked up. She hadn't expected that. Car accident, Hawk continued. Rural road, middle of nowhere. 3 cars passed her before someone finally stopped. By then it was too late. I'm sorry. So am I. Hawk's voice was steady, but there was an old pain underneath it. I spent a long time being angry about that, angry at the people who drove past, angry at God for letting it happen, angry at myself for not being there. What changed? I realized that anger wasn't going to bring her back, but maybe I could stop it from happening to someone else. He gestured around the room. That's what this is. That's why we ride. That's why we stop. Grace looked at the other bikers. Men with hard faces and harder hands. Men who looked like the kind of people you crossed the street to avoid. And yet they were here. They had carried her children through a storm. They had breathed life back into her baby. They were standing guard in a broken-down gas station, protecting a family they had never met. His name is Richard Holloway. The words came out before Grace could stop them. My husband's brother, David, died 9 months ago in a farming accident. Richard is trying to take my children. Hawk's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. Why, life insurance, $2 million split between the 4 kids. Richard gets control of the money if he gets custody. And the bruises. Grace's throat closed. She looked at Ruby, who was staring at the floor, her face blank in a way that made Grace's heart shatter. He visits. Court-ordered visitation while the custody case is pending. I didn't know what he was doing until 2 weeks ago. Ruby finally told me. The room went silent. Not the silence of disinterest, the silence of men who had just heard something that changed everything. Hawk stood up slowly. His hands were clenched at his sides. Deacon. Yeah. Make a call. You know who. Deacon nodded and stepped outside, phone already in his hand. Who's he calling? Grace asked. A lawyer, someone who handles cases like yours. I can't afford a lawyer. You won't need to. Hawk's voice was flat. Some things aren't about money. Grace shook her head. You don't understand. Richard has connections. He's a county commissioner. He has judges in his pocket police who owe him favors. No lawyer is going to. The lawyer I'm talking about doesn't care about county commissioners. Hawk cut her off. She doesn't care about judges or police or favors owed. She cares about children, and she has a perfect record of making sure predators never touch them again. Who is she? Someone who owes us, just like Walter owes us, just like a lot of people owe us. Grace wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that he didn't understand that Richard would find out that this would only make things worse. But Ruby was looking at her. 12 years old, with bruises on her arms and terror in her eyes, looking at her mother like she was waiting to see if hope was real or just another lie. Okay, Grace whispered. Okay? Hawk nodded. He turned to Walter. We'll need this place for a few days, maybe longer. Can you handle that? Walter smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it was there. I've been waiting 12 years to pay back what you did for my granddaughter Vincent. This doesn't even come close. It's a start. The storm raged outside. The wind howled against the windows, and the snow piled against the doors. But inside Walter Chen's gas station, surrounded by men who looked like monsters and acted like guardians, Grace Holloway sat with her children and let herself breathe. Lily was sleeping against her chest. Ruby had leaned into her shoulder. The twins were curled together near the heater, finally warm enough to rest. For the first time in 3 weeks, Grace didn't feel like she was being hunted. For the first time in 3 weeks, She felt like someone was standing between her family and the darkness. It might not last. Richard would come. The lawyers would argue. The system would try to crush her the way it always did. But tonight, in the middle of a storm that should have killed them all, Grace Holloway and her children were alive, and they weren't alone anymore. The night deepened. The storm settled into a steady rage, relentless, but predictable. Inside the gas station, bodies found corners and spaces arranging themselves for sleep. Grace couldn't sleep. She sat against the wall with Lily in her arms, watching the shadows move as men shifted position, checked windows, maintained a vigilance that seemed as natural to them as breathing. Hawk sat by the door. He hadn't moved in an hour. "You should rest," Grace said quietly. "So should you." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face, Lily's face, gray and still, and I know." Hawk's voice was soft. "I know what that's like. Does it go away?" "No." He turned to look at her. "But you learn to carry it. You learn to let it make you stronger instead of breaking you down." Grace was quiet for a moment. Then, "Tell me about Molly." Hawk smiled. It was a sad smile, worn at the edges, but genuine. "She was a hurricane in a little girl's body. Couldn't sit still for 5 seconds. Always running, climbing, exploring. Drove her mother crazy. Her mother died a year after Molly. Different accident. Same kind of road." He paused. "Sometimes I think the universe has a sick sense of humor." "I'm sorry. Don't be. They're together now. That's what I choose to believe anyway." Grace looked at her own children. Ruby had fallen asleep, sitting up her head against the wall. The twins were tangled together near the heater, breathing in sync the way they always did. Lily's heartbeat thumped steadily against her chest. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "for what you did tonight." "You don't have to thank me." "Yes, I do. You saved my daughter's life. You saved all of us." Hawk shook his head. "I did what anyone should do. I stopped. That's all. That's not all. Most people wouldn't stop for a woman on the side of the road in a storm. Most people wouldn't risk their lives for strangers. Most people are wrong." Hawk's voice hardened slightly. "That's the whole problem with this world. Everyone's so scared, so careful, so worried about what might happen to them if they help someone else. They drive past accidents. They ignore cries for help. They convince themselves it's not their problem." He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the white wall of snow. "My daughter died because people made that choice. 3 cars, 3 drivers, 3 chances to save her. They all kept going. And you've been trying to make up for that ever since. I've been trying to be the person she needed and didn't find." He turned back to face her. "That's why we do what we do. That's why we ride." Grace understood then. These weren't criminals playing at heroism. These were broken men who had found a way to make their wounds mean something. They had turned their pain into protection, their scars into shields. "What happens when the storm ends?" she asked. "We take you somewhere safe. Somewhere Richard Holloway can't reach." "There is no such place." "There is now." Hawk's voice was firm. "You're not alone anymore, Grace. Whatever happens next, you're not facing it alone." Grace wanted to argue. She wanted to point out that she'd heard promises like this before, that people always said they'd help and never followed through. But something in Hawk's eyes stopped her. Something that looked like absolute certainty, like a man who had made a promise to himself a long time ago and never once considered breaking it. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay." Hawk nodded. He sat back down by the door, resuming his vigil. Grace closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 weeks, sleep came without nightmares. And outside, the storm raged on. Grace woke to the sound of her daughter screaming. Ruby was thrashing on the floor, arms flailing, voice raw with terror. "Don't touch me! Don't touch me! Get away!" Grace scrambled across the room, her legs still weak from the cold. "Ruby! Ruby! Wake up!" She grabbed her daughter's shoulders. Ruby's eyes flew open, wild and unseeing. For 3 terrible seconds, she didn't recognize her own mother. Then she collapsed into Grace's arms, sobbing. "I'm sorry, Mama. I'm sorry." "Shh. It's okay. It's just a dream. Just a bad dream." But it wasn't a dream. Grace knew that. Ruby knew that. Everyone in the room knew that. Hawk stood near the door, watching. His face was unreadable, but his hands had curled into fists at his sides. "How long?" he asked quietly. Grace didn't look up. "What? How long has she been having nightmares like this? 2 weeks, since she told me what he did." The room was silent. The other bikers had woken at Ruby's screams. They stood against the walls, watching, waiting. "I want to know everything," Hawk said. "Not now, when she's ready, but I need to know what we're dealing with." Grace nodded. She held Ruby tighter, feeling her daughter's heartbeat slowly return to normal. The twins were awake now, huddled together near the heater. Mason's face was pale. Carter was crying silently. "Is Ruby okay?" Mason asked. "She's fine. Go back to sleep." "I can't sleep. I keep thinking about the car, about walking in the snow, about Lily." Grace closed her eyes. Her children had almost died last night. They had watched their baby sister stop breathing. They had walked through a blizzard that should have killed them all. And now they were in a stranger's gas station, surrounded by bikers running from a monster who wore a suit and tie and called himself family. "Come here," she said. "Both of you, come here." The twins crossed the room and pressed against her. Ruby shifted to make space. Within seconds, all 4 children were wrapped around their mother, a tangle of arms and legs and fear. Lily slept through it all. The baby's chest rose and fell, steadily oblivious to the chaos that had nearly claimed her life. "I've got you," Grace whispered. "I've got all of you." Hawk watched them for a long moment. Then he turned to Walter. "Is there somewhere more private? Somewhere they can rest without an audience?" Walter nodded. "Back room. It's warmer anyway. Has a bed. Get them settled. I need to make some calls." Grace looked up. "Calls to who?" "People who can help." Hawk's voice was flat. "People who owe me favors. People who make problems disappear." "I don't want anyone hurt. Richard is a predator." Hawk cut her off. "And I don't hurt predators. I destroy them. Legally, permanently, and completely." He walked out into the storm before Grace could respond. The back room was small, but warm. A single bed, a space heater boxes, stacked against the walls. Grace settled the children onto the mattress, arranging blankets around them like a fortress. Ruby's eyes were still red from crying. "Mama, who are these people? I don't know, baby. They have those patches. Hell's Angels, Mrs. Crawford at school said they're criminals." "Maybe they are. Or maybe they used to be. But they saved your sister's life. They saved all of us." "That man, the big one. He looks at us like what?" Ruby was quiet for a moment. "Like he's trying to protect us. Really protect us. Not pretend protect, like Uncle Richard used to say." Grace's stomach turned. Richard had always told the children he was protecting them from their mother's bad decisions, protecting them from the dangerous world outside. The word had become poison in Ruby's mouth. "These men are different," Grace said. She hoped it was true. "How do you know?" "I don't." But I have to believe it. Because right now they're all we have. Ruby nodded slowly. She pulled her brothers closer and closed her eyes. Mama, will you stay until we fall asleep? I'm not going anywhere. I promise. Grace sat on the edge of the bed, watching her children breathe. Outside, she could hear voices. Hawk and the others talking in low tones, planning something. She should have been afraid. She was in a room with 9 men she didn't know in a place she couldn't identify, with no way to contact the outside world. But for the first time in 3 weeks, she wasn't afraid. She was something else. Something she barely recognized. She was angry. Angry at Richard for what he had done. Angry at herself for not seeing it sooner. Angry at a system that gave a monster visitation rights while telling her she was paranoid. She had spent 9 months being afraid. 9 months running, hiding, begging for help that never came. No more. If these bikers could help her fight, she would fight. If they could teach her to be dangerous, she would learn. If they could give her the weapons she needed to destroy Richard Holloway, she would use them without hesitation. Her children would never be hurt again. She would die before she let that happen. And if she was lucky, she would take Richard Holloway down with her. The morning came gray and cold. The storm had weakened, but not stopped. Snow still fell steadily, covering the world in white silence. Hawk stood outside the gas station, phone pressed to his ear. He had been on the call for 20 minutes. Patricia, I'm telling you, this is bad. The kid has bruises. The mother has nothing. And the guy who did it is a county commissioner with connections everywhere. The voice on the other end was sharp and professional. Patricia Vance had been a prosecutor for 15 years before she went private. She had put away monsters that other lawyers wouldn't touch. And she owed Hawk more than she could ever repay. Tell me everything, Patricia said. Start from the beginning. Hawk told her. The storm, the highway, the baby who stopped breathing, the woman who collapsed in his arms, the bruises on the girl's arms, the name Richard Holloway. Patricia was silent for a long moment after he finished. I know that name. What do you mean, Richard Holloway? I've heard it before. Give me an hour. I need to make some calls. Patricia, 1 hour, Hawk. I'll call you back. The line went dead. Hawk stared at the phone, then shoved it back in his pocket. Deacon appeared beside him. What did she say? She knows the name. That's either very good or very bad. What do you want us to do? Hawk thought about the woman inside. Grace Holloway. A widow with 4 children, and nothing left but the will to survive. He thought about her oldest daughter, Ruby. 12 years old, with nightmares that wouldn't stop and scars that wouldn't heal. He thought about his own daughter, Molly. 7 years old forever. Gone because people drove past instead of stopping. We protect them, he said. Whatever it takes, however long it takes. We don't let that bastard touch them again. And if he comes looking... Hawk's jaw tightened. Then he finds out what happens when you threaten the people we're protecting. Deacon nodded. He had served with Hawk for 12 years. He had seen him angry before. But this was different. This was the cold, focused fury of a man who had found something worth fighting for. I'll tell the others. Do that. And Deacon, yeah. Call Bull's contact at the state police. I want to know everything about Richard Holloway. Every case he's touched, every favor he's owed, every skeleton in his closet. That could take time. Then start now. Deacon walked back inside. Hawk stood alone in the falling snow, watching the white wall of weather that had nearly killed 6 people last night. Something was coming. He could feel it the way he felt storms before they hit. A pressure in the air, a weight on his chest. Richard Holloway wasn't going to let this go. Men like him never did. They pushed and pushed until they got what they wanted, or until someone pushed back hard enough to break them. Hawk had broken men before. He wasn't proud of it, but he wasn't ashamed either. Some people needed breaking. Some people couldn't be reasoned with, or bargained with, or threatened into submission. Richard Holloway was about to find out which category he belonged to. Inside the gas station, Grace was feeding her children. Walter had found canned soup in a storage closet, and the smell of chicken noodle filled the small space. "I don't like soup," Carter said. "Eat it anyway," Grace replied. "We don't waste food." "But Mama," Carter David Holloway, "I have watched you eat dirt from the backyard. You can eat soup." The twins giggled. Even Ruby smiled slightly. It was a small moment of normalcy in the middle of chaos, and Grace held on to it like a lifeline. "Mrs. Holloway." Grace turned. Walter Chen stood behind her, a cup of coffee in his hands. "Please call me Grace." "Grace." Walter handed her the coffee. "There's something you should know about Vincent. About Hawk." "What is it?" Walter sat down across from her. His eyes were old, tired, full of stories she couldn't imagine. 12 years ago, my granddaughter was taken. She was 16. Men who did terrible things to young girls. Grace's blood went cold. "I'm so sorry." "The police couldn't help. They said they were doing everything they could, but I could see it in their faces. They had given up. My Lucy was just another statistic to them." "What happened?" "I found Vincent. I had heard stories about him, about the things his club did, not the criminal things, the other things. The children they protected, the families they saved." Walter paused, his hands wrapped around his own cup of coffee. "I went to him, and I begged. I got on my knees, and I begged this man I had never met to find my granddaughter. And do you know what he said? What? He said, 'Get up. No one kneels to me. We'll find her together.'" Grace felt tears prickling at her eyes. "Did he find her?" 3 days later. The men who took her. They're not taking anyone else. Ever." "What does that mean?" Walter smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. "It means that Vincent Morrow keeps his promises. And it means that whoever is hunting you, whoever hurt your daughter, they have no idea what's coming for them." Grace looked down at her coffee. The steam rose in lazy spirals, warming her face. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Not of your friend. Of what happens next. Richard has power. He has money. He has people who will do whatever he asks. So does Vincent." Walter leaned forward. "But the difference is Vincent's people believe in what they're doing. Richard's people believe in paychecks. When things get hard, paychecks run away. Belief stays until the end." "How can you be so sure?" "Because I've seen it. I've seen these men ride into battles they couldn't win and come out the other side. Not because they're stronger or smarter or better equipped, because they refuse to quit." Grace wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that there were people in this world who would fight for her family without expecting anything in return. But 9 months of running had taught her that fairy tales were lies. Knights in shining armor didn't exist, and people who offered help always wanted something. "What does Hawk want from me?" she asked. "What's the price?" Walter's expression softened. "He wants you to survive. That's all. That's the only price. Nobody does anything for free." "You're right. There's always a cost." Walter stood up. "For Vincent, the cost is that he has to live with himself. He has to look in the mirror every day and see a man who couldn't save his own daughter. Every child he protects, every family he helps, it doesn't bring Molly back. But it makes the reflection a little easier to bear. He walked away, leaving Grace alone with her thoughts and her cooling coffee. The children had finished their soup. Ruby was helping the twins clean up, while Lily slept in a makeshift crib made from a cardboard box and blankets, her family. Broken, scared, hunted, but alive. Grace made a decision. She found Hawk outside, still standing in the snow. His leather jacket was covered in white powder. His beard had icicles forming at the edges. "Tell me what you need," she said. Hawk turned to face her. "What do you mean, to fight Richard? To make sure he never touches my children again? Tell me what you need and I'll do it." "Grace, I'm done running." Her voice cracked. "I've been running for 9 months and it hasn't helped. Ruby still has nightmares. My children still flinch when they hear a man's voice. I still wake up every night checking the doors and windows." She stepped closer to him, her eyes blazing. "You said you destroy predators. Legally, permanently, completely. So tell me how. Tell me what I have to do. Because I would rather die fighting than spend another day hiding." Hawk looked at her for a long moment. He saw the fear in her eyes, but he saw something else too. Steel. The hard, cold determination of a mother who had finally reached her breaking point. "The lawyer I called is looking into Richard," he said. "She knows his name. That means he's done this before, or he's connected to people who have." "What does that mean for us?" "It means there might be evidence. Other victims. A pattern that we can prove." Grace's heart clenched. "Other children. Maybe. We don't know yet, but if there are, they deserve justice too. And if we can't find evidence, if Richard has buried everything too deep." Hawk's expression hardened. "Then we dig deeper. We find the people who know his secrets. We offer them something more valuable than his money. And we burn his world to the ground piece by piece until there's nothing left for him to hide behind. Is that legal?" "Everything we do will be legal. Patricia doesn't break laws. She uses them. She finds the cracks in the armor and she exploits them until the whole thing falls apart. And you," Hawk smiled slightly. "I provide motivation, protection, and occasionally intimidation. You scare people into talking. I remind them that some secrets aren't worth keeping, that some loyalties aren't worth honoring, that the man they're protecting wouldn't protect them if the situation was reversed." Grace nodded slowly. She understood. It wasn't pretty, and it wasn't noble, but it was effective. "What do you need from me?" "Everything. Every detail you can remember about Richard, every time he visited, every gift he gave the children, every conversation you overheard, every moment that felt wrong even if you couldn't explain why." "That could take hours." "We have hours. Storm won't break until tonight, and Patricia won't call back until she has something concrete." Hawk turned toward the door. "Come inside. We'll start with Ruby if she's ready to talk, and if she's not, we wait. No pressure, no demands, just patience." Grace followed him inside. The warmth hit her face like a gentle slap, reminding her how cold she had been. Ruby was sitting with the twins, reading them a story from an old magazine Walter had found. She looked up when Grace entered. "Mama, is everything okay?" "Everything's fine, baby. I need to talk to you about something. When you're ready." Ruby's face changed. She knew what this was about. She had known since she saw Hawk looking at her arms. "I can talk now." "Ruby, you don't have to—" "I know." Ruby stood up. Her hands were shaking slightly, but her voice was steady. "But I want to. I want to tell someone who will actually do something." Grace's heart broke and swelled at the same time. Her daughter was 12 years old and already braver than most adults. "Okay," Grace said. "Okay, baby. I'll be right here the whole time. They moved to the back room. Hawk sat in a chair near the door, far enough to give Ruby space, but close enough to hear everything. Take your time, he said. Start wherever you want. Stop whenever you need to. Ruby sat on the bed. Grace sat beside her, holding her hand. It started 6 months ago, Ruby began. The first time Uncle Richard took us for the weekend. Her voice shook, but she kept talking. And as she talked, as the details spilled out in halting sentences and tearful pauses, something changed in the room. Hawk's face went from hard to stone. Grace's fear transformed into white-hot rage, and somewhere in Nebraska, a county commissioner named Richard Holloway had no idea that his world was about to end. The phone rang at 2:47 in the afternoon. Hawk answered on the first ring. Patricia, what do you have? More than I expected. Patricia's voice was tight with controlled fury. Richard Holloway has a sealed juvenile record. Aggravated assault on a minor. He was 17, the victim was 14. His father paid off the family and had the records buried. Jesus. It gets worse. 15 years ago, there was a complaint filed against him by a foster family he was sponsoring. Sexual misconduct with a minor. The complaint was withdrawn 3 days later. The families have moved out of state and never came back. Someone paid them off. Or threatened them. Either way, the pattern is clear. This man has been a predator for at least 25 years, and he's been protected every step of the way. Hawk's jaw tightened. Can we use any of this? The sealed record is tricky, but I know a judge who might unseal it if we can show pattern of behavior. The withdrawn complaint is harder. We'd need to find the family and convince them to come forward again. Can you find them? I already have someone looking, but Hawk, there's something else. What? Richard Holloway filed an emergency custody petition yesterday, before the storm hit. He's claiming Grace Holloway attempted to kidnap her own children by fleeing the state without permission. Hawk's blood went cold. When's the hearing? Tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. Judge Margaret Chen presiding. Can we delay it? Not without showing up. And if Grace doesn't appear, Richard wins by default. He gets temporary emergency custody while the case is investigated. That's insane. She's their mother. She's their mother who fled the jurisdiction with 4 children in a blizzard. That's how Richard's lawyers will spin it. Unstable, erratic, dangerous. Hawk closed his eyes. He had seen this before. The system protecting predators while crushing their victims. The law used as a weapon against the people it was supposed to help. What do? We show up. We present our evidence. And we hope Judge Chen is more interested in protecting children than protecting county commissioners. And if she's not, Patricia was silent for a moment. Then we appeal. We fight. We expose Richard Holloway to the media, to the public, to anyone who will listen. We make him so toxic that no judge will rule in his favor. How long will that take? Months? Maybe years? We don't have months. Ruby can't survive months. I know. Patricia's voice softened slightly. That's why we're going to win tomorrow. Because the alternative is unacceptable. Hawk hung up the phone. He stood in the snow for a long moment, letting the cold clear his head. Tomorrow morning. 10 o'clock. The fight of Grace Holloway's life. She didn't know yet. He had to tell her. He had to watch her face as hope turned to fear, turned to determination. But first he had to make some calls. He had to gather resources. He had to prepare for war. Because Richard Holloway wasn't going to give up without a fight. And neither was Hawk. He walked back inside and found Grace sitting with Ruby. The girl had stopped talking. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were clearer, lighter, like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. "Mama, I feel better," Ruby said. I feel like I finally told the truth. Like it's not my secret anymore." Grace hugged her daughter tight. "It was never your fault, baby. Never." "I know. I know that now." Hawk watched them for a moment. Mother and daughter holding each other in a room that smelled like motor oil and chicken soup. Two survivors of something that should have destroyed them both. He hated what he was about to do, but she needed to know. "Grace, we need to talk." Grace looked up. She saw his face, and her expression changed. "What's wrong?" "Richard filed for emergency custody yesterday. There's a hearing tomorrow morning." Grace's face went white. "Tomorrow, but I can't. The storm. We're not—" "I know, but if you don't show up, he wins. He gets temporary custody while the courts investigate." "That can't happen. Hawk, that absolutely cannot happen." "It won't." His voice was iron. "We'll get you there. Patricia will represent you, and we'll bring everything we have." "Will it be enough?" Hawk looked at her daughter, at the brave 12-year-old who had just told her darkest secret to a room full of strangers. "It has to be," he said, "because I don't accept any other outcome." Grace stood up slowly. Her legs felt weak. Her hands felt numb. But her heart was beating strong and steady in her chest. "Then let's get ready," she said. "Let's end this." Ruby stood beside her mother. The twins appeared in the doorway, sensing the shift in energy, and outside the storm began to break. The convoy left Walter's gas station at 4:30 in the morning. 12 motorcycles cutting through the darkness, their headlights slicing the remnants of the storm like surgical blades. Grace rode in the sidecar again. Lily pressed against her chest, the other 3 children distributed among bikers who had become unexpected guardians. Ruby rode with Deacon. She had refused to ride with anyone else. "He doesn't talk much," she had told her mother. "I like that." The courthouse was 90 miles away. The roads were icy, treacherous, covered in patches of black ice that could send a bike sliding into a ditch without warning. But the angels rode like they had done this 1,000 times before. Because they had. Hawk led the convoy with the same focus he had shown during the blizzard. His mind was already in the courtroom, rehearsing arguments, anticipating attacks, preparing for every possible way this could go wrong. Patricia had called again at midnight with new information. The foster family from 15 years ago had been found. They were living in Oregon now. The daughter, now 31 years old, had agreed to provide a written statement. "She's been waiting for this," Patricia had said. "Waiting for someone to finally believe her." One more victim. One more voice. One more piece of evidence that Richard Holloway was exactly what Grace said he was. But would it be enough? The sun rose as they entered the county seat. The courthouse stood at the center of town, a gray stone building that looked like it had been there since the beginning of time. Cars were already gathering in the parking lot. News vans, too. "Someone leaked it," Deacon said through his helmet radio. "The press knows." Hawk's jaw tightened. "Who? Does it matter? They're here now." It could go either way. Media attention might protect Grace by making everything public, or it might destroy her by painting her as the unstable woman who fled with her children in a blizzard. "Stay close," Hawk ordered. "Don't talk to reporters. Don't react to anything. We walk in together and we walk out together." The convoy pulled into the parking lot. Engines died. Helmets came off. Grace stepped out of the sidecar on shaking legs. She hadn't slept. She had spent the night going over every detail with Patricia on the phone, preparing for questions she prayed she would never have to answer. Ruby appeared beside her. "Mama, there are cameras." "I know, baby. Don't look at them." "What if they ask questions?" You don't have to answer. You don't have to say anything. Ruby nodded, but her eyes were fixed on the courthouse doors, and Grace could see the fear building behind them. I don't want to go in there, Ruby whispered. I don't want to see him. Grace knelt down in front of her daughter. Listen to me. You are the bravest person I know. What you told us yesterday, what you're willing to say today, that takes more courage than most adults have in their entire lives. I'm scared. So am I. But we're going to be scared together. And when it's over, we're going to be free. Ruby's chin trembled. Then she straightened her spine and lifted her head. Okay, she said. Let's go. They walked toward the courthouse as a group. Grace in the center, children around her, bikers forming a protective wall on all sides. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted questions. None of them answered. The courthouse lobby was crowded. Lawyers in suits, families waiting for hearings, security officers trying to maintain order. Every head turned as the angels walked in. A woman approached them. Mid-50s, silver hair, sharp eyes. She wore a gray suit that probably cost more than Grace's car. Grace Holloway, I'm Patricia Vance. Grace shook her hand. Thank you for coming. Don't thank me yet. We have a fight ahead of us. Patricia's eyes swept over the group. Vincent, a word. They stepped aside. The children stayed close to Grace, watching everything with wide eyes. Richard's lawyer is Marcus Webb, Patricia said quietly. Former state prosecutor. Very good, very ruthless. He's going to try to paint Grace as unstable and dangerous. What's our counter? The truth. Ruby's testimony, if she's willing to give it. The statement from the Oregon victim. The sealed juvenile record, if the judge agrees to unseal it. And if she doesn't, Patricia's expression hardened. Then we pivot. We focus on the emergency nature of Grace's flight. We argue that any reasonable mother would have done the same thing to protect her children. Will that work? It might. Judge Chen is unpredictable. She's ruled against fathers in custody cases, and she's ruled against mothers. She follows the law, not politics. That's good for us. It means she might actually listen to the evidence instead of Richard's connections. But it also means we can't count on sympathy. We need facts. Hawk nodded. Ruby's ready. I talked to her this morning. She wants to testify. In open court, if that's what it takes. Patricia was quiet for a moment. She's 12 years old. She'll be cross-examined by Marcus Webb. He will try to destroy her credibility. And she'll destroy him instead. Hawk's voice was certain. That girl has more steel in her than half the men I know. I hope you're right. A bailiff appeared at the courtroom door. Holloway versus Holloway now entering. Grace's heart stopped. This was it. The moment everything changed. She gathered her children and walked toward the door. Ruby held her hand. The twins pressed against her sides. Lily slept in her arms, oblivious to the war about to be fought over her future. The courtroom was smaller than Grace had expected. 2 tables facing the judge's bench. A gallery behind them already filling with spectators. The angels filed into the back rows, their leather jackets drawing stares and whispers. And there at the other table sat Richard Holloway. Grace's stomach lurched. She hadn't seen him in 3 weeks. 3 weeks of running, hiding, praying she would never have to look at his face again. He looked exactly the same. Expensive suit, perfect hair, charming smile. The smile that had fooled everyone. The smile that had fooled her. Ruby made a sound beside her. A small, choked noise like an animal caught in a trap. Don't look at him, Grace whispered. Look at me. Just look at me. Ruby's eyes locked onto her mother's face. Her breathing was fast and shallow, but she didn't cry. She didn't run. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table. Patricia spread her files in front of her, already preparing for battle. Richard's lawyer, Marcus Webb, glanced over at them. His expression was smug, confident. He looked like a man who had already won. The bailiff called the court to order. Everyone rose as Judge Margaret Chen entered. She was 63 years old, with a face that revealed nothing and eyes that missed nothing. She sat down and surveyed the courtroom with the calm authority of someone who had seen it all. "We are here for an emergency custody petition filed by Richard Holloway against Grace Holloway regarding the minor children Ruby Mason Carter and Lily Holloway." Her voice was crisp and professional. "Mr. Webb, you may present your case." Webb stood. He buttoned his jacket, a practiced gesture that spoke of hundreds of courtroom appearances. "Your Honor, my client is here today because his sister-in-law, in a fit of irrational panic, fled the state of Nebraska with her 4 children during a dangerous winter storm. She did so without notifying the court, without notifying my client, and without regard for the safety of those children." He paused for effect. One of those children, the infant Lily, nearly died during this reckless flight. She stopped breathing on the side of Highway 83 and was only revived through the intervention of strangers. Gasps from the gallery. Judge Chen's expression remained neutral. "My client has been a devoted uncle to these children since their father's tragic death 9 months ago. He has provided financial support, emotional guidance, and stability during an incredibly difficult time. And how has Mrs. Holloway repaid that devotion by accusing him of unspeakable crimes without a shred of evidence?" Grace's hands clenched under the table. Patricia placed a calming hand on her arm. "We are asking this court to grant temporary emergency custody to Richard Holloway while these matters are properly investigated. The children deserve stability. They deserve safety. They deserve better than a mother who would risk their lives to avoid facing her own demons." Webb sat down. Richard nodded approvingly, still wearing that damn smile. Judge Chen turned to Patricia. "Ms. Vance, your response." Patricia stood. Unlike Webb, she didn't button her jacket or pause for effect. She simply spoke. "Your Honor, Grace Holloway did not flee in a fit of irrational panic. She fled because her 12-year-old daughter finally found the courage to tell her what Richard Holloway had been doing during his court-ordered visitation." The courtroom went silent. "Ruby Holloway will testify today that her uncle sexually abused her on multiple occasions over the past 6 months. She will provide specific details that could only be known by someone who experienced these events firsthand." Richard's smile flickered. Just for a second, but Grace saw it. "Furthermore, we have obtained a sworn statement from another victim of Richard Holloway, a woman who was 14 years old when he assaulted her 25 years ago, a case that was covered up by his family's money and influence." Webb shot to his feet. "Objection. This is inflammatory and completely unsubstantiated." "Sit down, Mr. Webb." Judge Chen's voice cut through his protest like a knife. "You'll have your chance to respond. Ms. Vance, continue." Patricia nodded. "We are also requesting that this court unseal Richard Holloway's juvenile record, which contains an aggravated assault conviction involving a 14-year-old victim. The pattern is clear. Your Honor, this man has been a predator for decades, and he has been protected at every turn by money connections and a system that refuses to believe victims." She turned to look directly at Richard. "Grace Holloway did not risk her children's lives by fleeing. She saved them, and we intend to prove it." Patricia sat down. The courtroom buzzed with whispered conversations. Judge Chen banged her gavel once. "Order!" She looked at both tables. "This court will hear testimony. Ms. Vance, call your first witness." The defense calls Ruby Holloway. Grace's heart stopped. She turned to look at her daughter. Ruby was pale, her hands were shaking, but she stood up anyway. "I can do this, Mama," she whispered. "I have to do this." Grace wanted to stop her. wanted to grab her daughter and run out of the courtroom and never look back. But Ruby was already walking toward the witness stand. The bailiff swore her in. Ruby placed her hand on the Bible and promised to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Then she sat down and looked at the man who had hurt her. Richard's smile was gone now. He stared at his niece with an expression that Grace had never seen before. Cold. Calculating. Dangerous. Patricia approached the witness stand gently. "Ruby, I know this is difficult. Take your time." Ruby nodded. Her voice was small but steady. "I'm okay. Can you tell the court what happened on the first weekend you spent with your Uncle Richard?" Ruby closed her eyes. When she opened them again, they were wet with tears, but her voice didn't waver. "He took us to his house. He made us dinner. Then he told the twins to watch a movie in the living room, and he took me to his office. What happened in the office? He said he wanted to show me something. Something special. He closed the door and locked it." Grace felt sick. She had heard this story yesterday, but hearing it again in public in front of strangers. Then what happened? Ruby told them. Every detail, every horrible moment. Her voice broke twice, but she kept going. She described what he did, where he touched her, what he said afterward. "He told me no one would believe me if I said anything. He said my mom was crazy, and everyone knew it. He said if I told he would take my brothers and sisters away, and I would never see them again." The courtroom was silent. Judge Chen's face had gone pale. "Is that why you didn't tell your mother right away?" "Yes." Tears streamed down Ruby's face. "I was scared. I thought it was my fault. I thought I did something wrong to make him—" Her voice broke completely. She buried her face in her hands and sobbed. Grace was on her feet before anyone could stop her. She crossed the courtroom and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "It's okay, baby. You did so good, you did so good." Webb stood up. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Mr. Webb, sit down and shut up." Judge Chen's voice was ice. "The witness may take a moment to compose herself." Ruby clung to her mother, crying into her shoulder. The whole courtroom watched in silence. Finally, Ruby pulled back. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I'm okay," she said. "I want to finish." Grace looked at Judge Chen. The judge nodded slowly. "Return to your seat, Mrs. Holloway. Ruby, are you able to continue?" "Yes, Your Honor." Grace walked back to her table. Her legs felt like water. Patricia squeezed her hand under the table. Patricia resumed her questioning. "Ruby, is there anything else you want the court to know?" Ruby looked at Richard. For the first time, there was no fear in her eyes. Only anger. "I want him to know that I'm not scared of him anymore. I want him to know that he doesn't get to hurt anyone else. And I want him to know that I will never ever forgive him for what he did to me." Richard's face went red. His hands gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. "No further questions, Your Honor." Judge Chen turned to Webb. "Your witness, counselor." Webb stood slowly. He straightened his tie. His confident demeanor had cracked slightly, but he was too experienced to show real weakness. "Ruby, I understand this is emotional for you, but I need to ask some difficult questions." Ruby's chin lifted. "I know." "You said these events happened over 6 months. Why didn't you tell anyone sooner?" "I told you. He threatened me." "But you told your mother eventually. What changed? I couldn't take it anymore. I was having nightmares. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I knew that if I didn't say something, I would—" She stopped. "You would what?" Ruby's voice dropped to a whisper. "I thought about hurting myself, so he couldn't hurt me anymore." Grace made a sound. a broken, wounded noise that she couldn't contain. Webb pressed on. And your mother immediately believed you without question? Yes. She didn't ask for proof. She didn't want to verify your story. I'm her daughter. Ruby's voice hardened. She believed me because she knows me. She knows I wouldn't lie about something like this. But you have been known to lie, haven't you? Your school records show 3 incidents of dishonesty in the past 2 years. Patricia jumped up. Objection. Attacking a child's credibility based on minor school infractions is completely inappropriate. Sustained, Judge Chen glared at Webb. Mr. Webb tread very carefully. Webb changed tactics. Ruby, is it possible you misunderstood your uncle's actions, that what you perceived as inappropriate was actually— He put his hands inside my clothes. Ruby's voice cut through his question like a blade. He touched me in places that no adult should ever touch a child. And he told me he would do it again if I didn't keep quiet. That's not a misunderstanding. That's assault. Webb opened his mouth, closed it. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say. No further questions? He mumbled, sitting down. Judge Chen looked at Ruby. Her expression had softened slightly. Thank you for your courage, young lady. You may step down. Ruby walked back to her mother. She was shaking again, but her head was high. I did it, Mama, she whispered. I told the truth. Grace held her tight. You were perfect. You were absolutely perfect. The trial continued. Patricia called the psychologist who had examined Ruby's statement. She called the Oregon victim by video testimony, a woman with gray hair and tired eyes, who described events from 25 years ago that matched Ruby's story almost exactly. She presented the sealed juvenile record, which Judge Chen agreed to unseal based on the pattern of behavior. And with each piece of evidence, Richard Holloway's mask cracked a little more. By the time Webb presented his defense, it was too late. He called character witnesses who praised Richard's community involvement. He presented Richard's own tearful testimony, his claims that he loved those children like his own, that these accusations were destroying his life. But the damage was done. Judge Chen called a recess at 3 hours in the afternoon. She would deliver her ruling in 1 hour. Grace sat in the hallway with her children around her. The angels stood guard nearby, keeping reporters and curious spectators at a distance. What do you think? She asked Patricia. I think we have a chance, a good chance. But not a certainty. Nothing in law is certain. Patricia sat down beside her. But Ruby was incredible. She faced that man and she didn't back down. That matters. Hawk appeared with coffee. He handed cups to Grace and Patricia, then crouched down in front of Ruby. You know what you did in there? Ruby shook her head. You showed the whole world who you really are. Not a victim, a survivor. And you showed them who he really is, a coward who preys on children. Ruby's eyes filled with tears again. I was so scared. I know. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. The hour passed slowly. Grace held Lily and watched the clock, and tried not to think about what would happen if they lost. Then the bailiff called them back to the courtroom. Judge Chen took her seat. Her face was unreadable. I have reviewed all testimony and evidence presented today. This is my ruling. Grace held her breath. The emergency custody petition filed by Richard Holloway is denied. The courtroom erupted. Grace's legs gave out. She would have fallen if Hawk hadn't caught her. Judge Chen banged her gavel. Order, I am not finished. The room fell silent. Based on the testimony provided today, I am also issuing a temporary restraining order against Richard Holloway. He is prohibited from any contact with Ruby Mason Carter or Lily Holloway pending a full criminal investigation. Richard shot to his feet. "You can't do this. These are lies. All of it." Furthermore, Judge Chen continued, raising her voice over his protests, "I am recommending to the district attorney that Richard Holloway be investigated for sexual assault of a minor. The pattern of behavior presented today is deeply troubling and demands immediate attention." Two bailiffs moved toward Richard. His face had gone from red to white. "This isn't over," he hissed at Grace. "You think you've won. You haven't won anything." Hawk stepped between them. His massive frame blocked Richard's view of Grace completely. "Yes, she has," he said quietly. "And so have we." The bailiffs escorted Richard out of the courtroom. Webb followed already on his phone, probably calling damage control, but none of that mattered anymore. Grace turned to her children. Ruby was crying. The twins were jumping up and down. Lily was awake now, babbling happily, completely unaware that her future had just been saved. "We did it," Grace whispered. "We actually did it." Patricia gathered her files. "This is just the beginning. There will be more hearings, more investigations, probably a criminal trial. But for now, your children are safe." "Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank Ruby. She won this case, not me." Grace looked at her daughter. 12 years old, brave beyond measure, standing in a courtroom after telling her darkest secret to a room full of strangers. "I'm so proud of you," Grace said. Ruby smiled through her tears. "I'm proud of me, too." They walked out of the courthouse together. The angels surrounded them, creating a wall of leather and steel against the waiting cameras. Reporters shouted questions. Flashes exploded. None of it touched them. They had walked into that building as victims. They walked out as survivors. And somewhere behind them, Richard Holloway sat in a holding cell, finally understanding that his world had just collapsed around him. The war wasn't over yet, but the first battle had been won. 3 days after the courtroom victory, Richard Holloway made bail. Grace found out from a phone call at 6 hours in the morning. Patricia's voice was tight, urgent. "He's out. Posted $200,000 an hour ago." Grace's blood went cold. She was standing in the kitchen of the Angels clubhouse where she and the children had been staying since the hearing. The coffee cup in her hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. "How is that possible?" The judge said. The judge issued a restraining order, not a detention order. His lawyers argued he wasn't a flight risk. The bondsman agreed. "So he's just out there. He can't come within 500 feet of you or the children. He can't contact you by any means. If he violates the order, he goes straight to jail. And if he doesn't care about the order?" Patricia was silent for a moment. "That's why I'm calling. Watch your back, Grace. Men like Richard don't accept defeat. They retaliate." Grace hung up the phone. Her hands were shaking. Hawk appeared in the doorway. He had heard everything. "We need to talk," he said. They sat at the long table in the main room. Deacon Bull Razor and 6 other angels joined them. The children were still sleeping upstairs, safe for now. "Richard's going to come for her," Hawk said. "Not directly. He's too smart for that. But he'll find a way." Deacon nodded. "I've seen his type before. County commissioner with connections everywhere. He'll use the system against her. File complaints, call in favors, make her life impossible." "What do we do?" Grace asked. Hawk leaned forward. "We do what we always do. We protect you. But this time we go on offense." "What does that mean?" "It means we don't wait for him to make a move. We dig deeper. We find every skeleton in his closet. We expose him so completely that no one will ever trust him again." Bull cracked his knuckles. "I've got contacts at the state police. They're already looking into his finances. Word is there's some irregularities in his campaign accounts." "What kind of irregularities?" "The kind that could end a political career. Maybe worse." Grace felt something shift inside her. For 3 weeks, she had been running. For 3 days, she had been hiding. But now, surrounded by these men who had risked everything for her family, she felt something different. She felt ready to fight back. "Tell me what you need," she said. "I'll do whatever it takes." Hawk smiled. It was a cold smile, the smile of a man preparing for war. "That's exactly what I wanted to hear." The next 72 hours were chaos. Patricia filed a civil suit against Richard for damages related to Ruby's abuse. The Oregon victim, emboldened by Ruby's testimony, filed her own suit. 2 more women came forward with stories from decades past. The media descended on the county like locusts. Richard Holloway, the respected commissioner, was suddenly Richard Holloway, the accused predator. His face was on every news channel, every newspaper, every website. His political allies began to distance themselves. His friends stopped returning calls. His wife filed for divorce and moved to her sister's house in Colorado. And through it all, Richard stayed silent. No public statements, no press conferences, no defense. That silence terrified Grace more than anything. "He's planning something," she told Hawk on the 4th day. "I can feel it. Let him plan. We're ready. You don't know him like I do. When Richard goes quiet, that's when he's most dangerous." Hawk looked at her for a long moment. "What do you think he'll do?" "I don't know. But it won't be legal. And it won't be direct. He'll find someone else to do his dirty work." That prediction proved accurate sooner than anyone expected. The call came at 2:00 in the morning. Grace's phone buzzed on the nightstand, an unknown number flashing on the screen. She answered without thinking. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice, distorted and mechanical. "You think you've won? You haven't won anything. We're coming for you. All of you." The line went dead. Grace sat up in bed, her heart pounding. Ruby stirred beside her, awakened by her mother's movement. "Mama, what's wrong?" "Nothing, baby. Go back to sleep." But Grace didn't sleep. She lay awake until dawn, staring at the ceiling, knowing that the real battle was just beginning. Hawk was furious when she told him. "Why didn't you wake me immediately? What could you have done? It was an anonymous call. Probably a burner phone. I could have—" He stopped himself. His jaw was tight. His hands clenched. "From now on, you tell me everything. The second it happens. Understood? Understood." He made calls. Within an hour, the clubhouse security had been doubled. Angels from 3 different states were riding in to provide backup. A tech expert named Mouse was tracing the call, trying to find the source. "This isn't just Richard," Deacon said during the emergency meeting. "He doesn't have the connections for something like this. Anonymous calls, threats against the kids, that's professional." "Who then? Could be hired muscle. Could be people he's got dirt on. Could be anyone." Hawk turned to Grace. "Your husband, David, what did he do before the farming accident?" Grace frowned. "He worked at the processing plant. Maintenance mostly. Why, any connection to Richard's business dealings?" I don't think so. They barely spoke. Richard didn't approve of me marrying David." "Why not?" "He said David wasn't good enough, didn't have the right ambitions." "But I always thought—" She trailed off. "Thought what?" "I thought Richard was jealous. David was everything he wasn't. Kind. Honest. Good with the kids." Hawk exchanged a look with Deacon. Something passed between them that Grace couldn't read. "We need to look into your husband's accident," Hawk said carefully. "The circumstances." Grace felt ice in her veins. "What are you saying?" "I'm not saying anything yet. But if Richard wanted you vulnerable, wanted access to those kids, removing David from the picture would be the first step." "No." Grace shook her head violently. No, it was an accident. Machine malfunction. The company investigated. The company paid you off with 3 months' salary and a sympathy card. That's not an investigation. That's a cover-up. Grace's world tilted. She had spent 9 months grieving her husband, accepting his death as a terrible accident. The idea that it might have been something else. "I need air," she gasped. "I need—" She ran outside before anyone could stop her. Ruby found her 10 minutes later sitting on the steps behind the clubhouse, sobbing into her hands. "Mama!" Grace looked up. Her daughter's face was pale with concern. "Baby, you should be inside." "I heard what they said." Ruby sat down beside her. "About Daddy." "You shouldn't have heard that." "But I did. And I've been thinking." Grace wiped her eyes. "Thinking about what? About Uncle Richard. About how he acted after Daddy died. Remember how he showed up the day after the funeral? How he said he was going to take care of us?" "I remember. I thought it was weird. He and Daddy never got along, but suddenly he's at our house every day bringing gifts, offering to help with money." Grace felt sick. She had been so grateful for Richard's help in those early days, so relieved to have someone taking charge while she drowned in grief. "He was positioning himself," she whispered, "from the very beginning. Mama, if he hurt Daddy, we don't know that. We don't know anything for sure. But what if Ruby?" Grace took her daughter's face in her hands. "Listen to me. Whatever happened to your father, we are going to find out the truth. But right now our job is to stay safe. Our job is to protect your brothers and sister. Can you do that with me?" Ruby nodded slowly. "I can do that." "Good. Now let's go back inside." They walked back into the clubhouse together. Hawk was waiting, his face etched with guilt. "I shouldn't have said that in front of— You should have said it a long time ago." Grace's voice was steady now. "If Richard had something to do with David's death, I want to know. I want to prove it. And I want him to pay for it." Hawk studied her face. "That's a different fight than the one we're already in." "Then we fight both. It could get dangerous." "It's already dangerous. My daughter is getting death threats. My baby almost died in a blizzard. My husband might have been murdered by his own brother." Grace's voice hardened. "I'm done being afraid. I'm done running. If Richard Holloway wants a war, I'll give him one." Hawk smiled. It was a real smile this time, full of respect. "Welcome to the club," he said. The investigation into David's death began that afternoon. Bull's contact at the state police pulled the original accident report. Mouse hacked into the processing plant's maintenance records. Deacon tracked down former employees who had witnessed the accident. The picture that emerged was troubling. David had been working alone that night. The machine that killed him had passed inspection 2 days earlier. The safety protocols that should have prevented the accident had been disabled. Something that shouldn't have been possible without a supervisor's access code. "Who had access to those codes?" Hawk asked. Mouse pulled up a list. 12 people. But look at number 7. Grace leaned forward. Her breath caught in her throat. Richard Holloway. Board Member Emergency Safety Override Access. He was on the plant's board. Silent investor. Put in $50,000 8 years ago, got board access as part of the deal. So he could have disabled the safety systems. Could have. Or could have gotten someone else to do it. Either way, he had the means. Grace's hands were shaking. "This isn't proof." "No, but it's a start." The next breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Walter Chen arrived at the clubhouse that evening, his face grim. He was carrying a box of old papers yellowed with age. "I've been going through my records," he said, "from 12 years ago when Vincent saved my Lucy." "What did you find? The men who took her. The ones who did what they did." One of them was connected to Richard Holloway. The room went silent. What kind of connection? Business, money laundering through a series of shell companies. Lucy was taken because she stumbled onto evidence of it. They wanted to silence her permanently. Grace felt like she was falling. The web of Richard's crimes was so much larger than she had imagined. "Why didn't this come out before?" Hawk demanded. "Because the man was killed before he could talk. Prison fight, supposedly. But I always wondered. Richard had him killed. I can't prove it, but the timing was convenient." Hawk turned to the other angels. "This changes everything. We're not just dealing with a child predator. We're dealing with someone who kills to protect his secrets. What do? We gather everything. Every piece of evidence, every connection, every crime. And when we have enough, we take it to the FBI. Not local cops, not state police, federal agents who can't be bought or intimidated. That could take weeks, months. Then we work fast, and we keep Grace and those kids safe until we're done." Grace stood up. Her fear had transformed into something else. Something cold and sharp and focused. "He killed my husband," she said. "He abused my daughter. He tried to take my children. And he's been doing this to people for decades." She looked at each biker in turn. "I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how dangerous it gets. Richard Holloway is going to pay for everything he's done. And I'm going to be there when it happens." Hawk nodded. "Then let's get to work." The days that followed were a blur of activity. Patricia filed additional motions to freeze Richard's assets. Mouse uncovered a network of offshore accounts that traced back to his shell companies. Former employees of the processing plant began coming forward with stories of safety violations and cover-ups. And through it all, the threats continued. Anonymous calls, menacing letters, a dead rat left on the clubhouse steps. Someone slashed the tires on 3 of the Angels' bikes. Richard was getting desperate, and desperate men were dangerous. The attack came on a Tuesday afternoon. Grace was walking Ruby to a therapy appointment 2 blocks from the clubhouse. Deacon was with them, providing security. The street was quiet, empty, except for a few parked cars. The van came out of nowhere. It jumped the curb tires, screeching, heading straight for them. Deacon shoved Grace and Ruby behind a parked car and drew his weapon. "Stay down!" The van stopped. 3 men in ski masks jumped out. They weren't carrying guns. They were carrying baseball bats. "Just the woman and the girl," one of them said. "No one else gets hurt." Deacon fired a warning shot into the air. "Back off!" The men hesitated, but they didn't retreat. Grace grabbed Ruby and ran. She heard Deacon fighting behind her, heard the crack of wood against flesh, heard someone scream. She didn't look back. They made it half a block before another man stepped out of an alley, blocking their path. He was huge, bigger than Hawk, with cold, empty eyes. "Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Holloway sends his regards." Grace pushed Ruby behind her. "Stay away from my daughter." "I don't want the daughter. I want you. Come quietly, and the girl can go home." "Like hell." The man smiled. He started toward them. Then a motorcycle engine roared at the end of the street. Hawk. He came like a missile, his bike eating up the distance in seconds. He didn't slow down. He aimed directly at the man blocking their path. The man dove out of the way at the last second. Hawk's bike skidded to a stop, and he was off it before the engine died, his fists already flying. The fight was brutal and short. Hawk hit the man once, twice, 3 times. The man went down and didn't get up. More bikes appeared. Angels swarming into the street, surrounding the van, pulling the attackers off Deacon and pinning them to the ground. It was over in less than 2 minutes. Hawk ran to Grace. "Are you hurt?" "No, Ruby. I'm okay, Mama." Deacon limped over. His face was bloody, his arm hanging at an odd angle. They were professionals. Hired muscle. Who sent them? The big man on the ground groaned. Hawk grabbed him by the collar and hauled him up. Who sent you? The man spat blood. Go to hell! Hawk's face went cold. He leaned in close. I've been to hell. I built a house there. Now tell me who sent you or I'll show you what I learned. The man's bravado cracked him. Holloway. Richard Holloway. He paid us $50,000 to grab the woman. Said to make it look like a kidnapping. And then what? I don't know. He said he'd handle the rest. Hawk dropped him. He turned to Deacon. Call Patricia. Call the FBI contact. Call everyone. What are you going to do? Hawk looked at Grace. His eyes were blazing. Richard Holloway just made the biggest mistake of his life, and I'm going to make sure he knows it. The arrested men talked within hours. They gave up everything. The payment, the plan, the contact who had arranged it all. They provided phone records, bank transfers, text messages that traced directly back to Richard Holloway. The FBI moved that night. Grace watched from the clubhouse as the news broke. Richard Holloway arrested at his home, charged with conspiracy to commit kidnapping, witness tampering, and money laundering. Additional charges pending. The footage showed him being led out in handcuffs, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. He was still wearing his expensive suit, still trying to look respectable. But everyone could see the truth now. Ruby stood beside her mother, watching the screen. Is it over? She asked quietly. Grace put her arm around her daughter. Almost. Not quite, but almost. Hawk joined them. He looked exhausted, but there was something like peace in his eyes. The FBI found evidence connecting him to David's death. They're opening a murder investigation. Grace closed her eyes. She had known it was coming, but hearing it confirmed, he killed my husband. He really killed him. He's going to pay for it, for all of it. Ruby leaned into her mother's side. Daddy would be proud of you, Mama, for fighting back. Grace felt tears streaming down her face, but for the first time in 9 months, they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of relief. The nightmare was finally ending. And somewhere in a federal holding cell, Richard Holloway was learning that money and power couldn't protect him from the truth. The Brotherhood had risen. The family had survived. And justice at long last was coming. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Grace sat in the federal courthouse every single day, watching the man who had destroyed her life finally face justice. Ruby sat beside her for the first 2 days, then asked to stop coming. I don't need to see him anymore, she explained. I already know who he is. I already know what he did. Watching him lie about it won't change anything. Grace understood. She wished she could stay away too. But something kept pulling her back to that courtroom, something that wouldn't let her rest until she heard the verdict with her own ears. The prosecution presented their case methodically. The abuse charges came first. Ruby's testimony from the custody hearing was entered into evidence. The Oregon victim testified in person this time, her voice steady as she described events from 25 years ago. 2 more women came forward during the trial. Women who had stayed silent for decades, waiting for someone else to be brave first. Ruby had been that someone. The money laundering charges followed. Mouse's digital forensics had uncovered a web of shell companies spanning 6 states. Millions of dollars funneled through fake businesses' offshore accounts and political donations that violated every campaign finance law on the books. Then came the murder charge. The processing plant's maintenance supervisor broke down on the stand. He admitted that Richard had paid him $20,000 to disable the safety systems the night David died. He had lived with the guilt for 9 months, drinking himself half to death, until the FBI showed up at his door. "I didn't know he was going to kill anyone," the supervisor sobbed. "He said it was just insurance, said he needed to make something look like an accident for tax purposes. I didn't know anyone would get hurt." Grace listened to every word. Her hands were clenched so tight her nails drew blood from her palms. Hawk sat behind her close enough to touch if she needed him. She didn't cry. She had done all her crying already. Now she just wanted to hear the words that would end this nightmare forever. The defense tried everything. Character witnesses who praised Richard's community involvement. Expert testimony questioning the reliability of the forensic evidence. Emotional appeals about a good man being railroaded by vindictive accusers. None of it worked. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Grace was in the hallway when the bailiff announced they had reached a verdict. Her heart stopped. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Hawk took her hand. "Whatever happens," he said, "you already won. You got your kids back. You exposed the truth. Nothing they say in there changes that." "I know." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "But I need to hear it. I need to know it's real." They walked back into the courtroom together. Richard Holloway stood at the defense table. He was thinner than he had been at the custody hearing, his expensive suit hanging loose on his frame. Prison had aged him. Fear had aged him more. He didn't look at Grace. He hadn't looked at her once during the entire trial. The judge asked the jury foreman to read the verdict. "On the charge of first-degree murder in the death of David Holloway, we find the defendant guilty." Grace's knees buckled. Hawk caught her, held her upright. "On the charge of sexual abuse of a minor, we find the defendant guilty." Tears streamed down her face. She didn't try to stop them. "On the charge of conspiracy to commit kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty." The foreman continued reading. "Guilty on money laundering. Guilty on witness tampering. Guilty on campaign finance violations. Guilty on racketeering. Guilty on every single count." Richard swayed on his feet. His lawyer grabbed his arm to steady him. "This court will reconvene in 30 days for sentencing," the judge announced. "The defendant is remanded to federal custody without bail." The marshals moved forward. Richard finally looked at Grace as they cuffed his hands behind his back. His eyes were empty, defeated. The eyes of a man who had finally lost everything. Grace met his gaze without flinching. "This is for David," she said quietly. "And for Ruby. And for every person you ever hurt." Richard opened his mouth to respond, but the marshals pulled him away before he could speak. Grace watched him go. She watched until the door closed behind him, until she couldn't see him anymore, until the nightmare was finally completely, irrevocably over. Then she turned to Hawk and buried her face in his chest. "It's done," she whispered. "It's finally done." Hawk held her tight. His own eyes were wet, though he would never admit it. "Yeah," he said. "It is." The sentencing hearing came exactly 30 days later. The judge gave Richard Holloway 4 consecutive life sentences plus 75 years. He would die in federal prison. He would never touch another child. He would never hurt another family. Grace didn't attend the sentencing. She didn't need to. Instead, she spent that day at the cemetery, standing in front of David's grave, with all 4 children beside her. "We did it," she told him. "We got justice. Ruby was so brave, David. You would be so proud of her. You would be proud of all of them." Ruby placed flowers on the headstone. The twins drew pictures and left them tucked against the marble. Lily, now 8 months old and starting to crawl, sat in Grace's arms and babbled at the sky. I'm going to be okay, Grace continued. We're all going to be okay. I met some people who helped us. Good people, even though they don't look like it. She laughed softly. You'd like them. They're stubborn and loud and they never give up. Kind of like you. She knelt down and pressed her hand against the cold stone. I love you. I'll always love you. But I think it's okay for me to be happy again. I think you'd want that. Ruby put her hand on her mother's shoulder. He would, Mama. Daddy always wanted you to be happy. Grace looked up at her daughter. 12 years old, going on 30. So much stronger than anyone had a right to expect. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. They stayed at the cemetery for another hour, talking to David, sharing memories, saying things they had been too afraid to say while the trial was happening. When they finally left, Grace felt lighter than she had in years. The grief was still there. It would always be there. But it wasn't crushing her anymore. She could breathe again. She could live again. 6 months passed. Grace moved into a small house 3 blocks from the Angels clubhouse. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, a cramped kitchen, a backyard just big enough for the kids to play in, but it was hers. The first thing she had ever owned that no one could take away. She got a job at Patricia Vance's law firm, starting as a receptionist, but quickly moving up to office manager. Patricia said she had a gift for organization, for making sense of chaos. You survived Richard Holloway, Patricia told her. Everything else is easy by comparison. The children thrived. The twins started at a new school and made friends within the first week. Lily said her first word, Mama, on a Tuesday morning that Grace would remember for the rest of her life. And Ruby began to heal. The nightmares didn't stop completely. They probably never would. But they came less frequently now, once a week, instead of every night. She started seeing a therapist who specialized in trauma recovery. She joined a support group for young survivors of abuse. I want to help other kids, she told Grace one evening. Kids who went through what I went through. I want them to know they're not alone. That's a beautiful goal, baby. Maybe I'll be a lawyer like Patricia, or a therapist, or both. You can be anything you want. You know that, right? Ruby smiled. It was a real smile, the kind that reached her eyes. I know, Mama. You've shown me. Hawk came by the house almost every day. He helped with repairs, played with the kids, sat on the porch with Grace watching the sunset. They didn't put a label on what they were. They didn't need to. Some relationships defied definition. Some connections were stronger than any word could capture. I never thanked you properly, Grace said one evening, for everything you did. You don't need to thank me. Yes, I do. You saved my daughter's life on that highway. You saved all of us. And then you kept saving us over and over, even when it was dangerous, even when it cost you. Hawk was quiet for a moment. His eyes were fixed on something in the distance, something only he could see. 15 years ago, my daughter died because no one stopped to help. I spent a long time being angry about that. Angry at the world, angry at God, angry at myself for not being there. And now I understand that anger doesn't bring anyone back. But action does. Every family I protect, every child I save, that's how I honor Molly. That's how I make her death mean something. Grace reached over and took his hand. She would be proud of you. What you've built, what you've done. The lives you've changed. You think so? I know so. Because I'm one of those lives. My children are 4 of those lives. And we're never going to forget what you did for us. Hawk squeezed her hand. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. Some things were understood without words. 1 year after the blizzard, the Angels held a gathering at their clubhouse. It wasn't a party, exactly. It was more like a reunion, a celebration of everyone who had been part of the journey. Walter Chen came, his white hair gleaming under the lights. Patricia Vance came taking a rare evening off from her caseload. The Oregon victim came now a friend, rather than just a fellow survivor. And Grace came with all 4 children in tow. The clubhouse had been transformed, tables covered with food, music playing from somewhere in the back, children running through the crowd laughing and shouting, completely unafraid of the leather-clad men who surrounded them. Lily was walking now, 14 months old, and determined to explore every corner of the room. Mason and Carter had found a group of kids their age and were already deep in some complicated game involving toy motorcycles. Ruby stood with Deacon, who had become something like an older brother to her over the past year. His arm was still scarred from the attack, but he wore those scars proudly. "They're badges of honor," he had told Ruby. "Battle wounds from protecting someone worth protecting." Grace found Hawk near the back of the room, watching everything with a small smile on his face. "Thank you for this," she said. "Thank Walter. It was his idea. I mean, thank you for everything. For being there when no one else was. For believing us when no one else would." Hawk turned to face her. His gray eyes were soft, unguarded. "You know why I stopped that night on the highway? Because you're a good man who helps people. Because I saw a little girl's face through the snow. She was trying so hard to be brave, trying so hard to hold her family together while her mother was falling apart." He paused. "She reminded me of Molly, the way Molly would have been if she had gotten the chance to grow up." Grace felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Hawk, I didn't save you that night, Grace. You saved me. You and your kids. You gave me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that? A reason to keep going. A reason to believe that what we do actually matters." Grace stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. He held her close, his massive frame somehow gentle, protective, safe. "You matter," she whispered. "What you do matters. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know that." Hawk didn't respond, but his arms tightened around her, and Grace felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Home. Not a place, not a building, not an address. Home was this. These people. This moment. This family she had found in the most unlikely place imaginable. Ruby appeared beside them. She looked at her mother and Hawk at the way they held each other and smiled. "I want to say something," she announced. "To everyone. Is that okay?" Hawk released Grace and nodded. "Go ahead." Ruby walked to the center of the room. Someone turned down the music. Conversations faded as people turned to look at the 13-year-old girl, standing alone in the middle of the crowd. "I want to tell you a story," Ruby said. Her voice was clear and strong. "About the worst night of my life, and the best people I've ever met." She told them everything. The blizzard. The highway. Lily stopping breathing. The headlights appearing through the snow. The man who walked through the storm and said 2 words that changed everything. "Take my hand." "I was 12 years old," Ruby continued. "I was scared and cold, and I thought we were all going to die. And then these strangers appeared. Strangers everyone told me to be afraid of. Strangers who looked nothing like the helpers I'd been taught to trust." She looked around the room at the Angels, at the men in leather who had become her protectors, her friends, her family. They saved us. Not because they had to. Not because they would get anything out of it, but because that's who they are. That's what they do. They stop when no one else will. They fight when no one else can. They protect people who have no one else to protect them. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pushed through. A year ago, I was a victim. I was broken and scared, and I didn't think I would ever feel safe again. But these people, this family, they showed me that I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life helping other survivors find their way back. She turned to Hawk. You saved my baby sister's life. You saved my mother's sanity. You saved me from a monster who should have been stopped decades ago. And you did it all without asking for anything in return. Hawk's eyes were wet. He didn't try to hide it. So thank you, Ruby said. Thank you for being the heroes that no one expected. Thank you for proving that courage comes in unexpected packages. And thank you for showing me that family isn't about blood. It's about choice. It's about standing together when the world tries to tear you apart. She walked over to Hawk and hugged him tight. You're my family now. All of you. And I'm never going to forget what you did for us. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Then someone else. Then everyone. The applause went on for a long time. Grace stood in the corner, tears streaming down her face, watching her daughter embrace the man who had saved them all. Around her, the angels cheered and whistled and pounded tables with their fists. This was her life now. This impossible, beautiful, unexpected life that had risen from the ashes of tragedy. She had lost her husband. She had almost lost her children. She had been hunted, threatened, attacked, and nearly destroyed. But she had survived. And more than survived, she had found something she never expected to find. A home. A family. A purpose. The party continued late into the night. Grace danced with her children. She laughed with Patricia and Walter and the Oregon victim, whose name was Sarah, and who had become one of her closest friends. She held Lily on her hip and swayed to music that somehow felt exactly right. Hawk found her near midnight when the crowd had thinned and the children had fallen asleep in a pile on a couch in the corner. Come outside with me, he said. I want to show you something. They walked to the parking lot, where a row of motorcycles gleamed under the streetlights. Hawk led her to his bike, the same bike that had carried them through the blizzard a year ago. I never properly taught you to ride, he said. Is now really the time? Why not? It's a clear night, no ice, no snow, just you and me and the road. Grace looked at the bike. A year ago, she would have been terrified. A year ago, she couldn't imagine trusting anyone enough to climb on the back of a motorcycle and let them carry her into the darkness. But a year ago, she had been a different person. Okay, she said. Show me. Hawk handed her a helmet. She put it on, adjusting the strap under her chin. He climbed onto the bike and started the engine. Hold on tight, he said. Lean when I lean. Trust the machine. Grace climbed on behind him. She wrapped her arms around his waist, feeling the warmth of his body through his leather jacket. Ready? Ready. They pulled out of the parking lot and onto the empty street. The wind hit Grace's face cold, but not bitter. The engine rumbled beneath her, powerful but controlled. They rode through the town past the courthouse, where Richard had been convicted, past the cemetery, where David rested, past the hospital, where Lily had been born. And then they hit the highway. The same highway where Grace had almost died a year ago. The same stretch of road where her daughter had stopped breathing and a stranger had brought her back to life. But it didn't feel like death now. It felt like freedom. Grace leaned into the curves, trusting Hawk to guide them safely. The stars spread out above them, endless and beautiful. The road stretched ahead, full of possibilities she couldn't have imagined 12 months ago. She wasn't running anymore. She wasn't hiding. She wasn't afraid. She was living. They rode for an hour before turning back. When they finally pulled into the clubhouse parking lot, Grace felt something she had almost forgotten existed. Joy. Pure, uncomplicated, unreserved joy. "Thank you," she said as she climbed off the bike. "For what?" "For reminding me that life can still be beautiful." Hawk pulled off his helmet. His gray eyes found hers in the darkness. "It can," he said. "It always can. Even after the worst things happen. Even when you think you'll never feel anything good again. Beauty finds a way." Grace stepped forward and kissed him. Not passionately, not desperately gently. A promise rather than a demand. He kissed her back the same way. "So what happens now?" she asked when they finally pulled apart. "Whatever we want. That's the whole point." Grace looked back at the clubhouse, where her children slept safe and warm, surrounded by people who would die to protect them. "I want to stay," she said, "here with these people. With you." "Then stay. And I want to help. What you do helping families protecting children, I want to be part of it." Hawk smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." They walked back into the clubhouse together, hand in hand. 5 years later, the Molly Morrow Foundation had helped over 300 families escape dangerous situations. Grace ran the day-to-day operations, coordinating with law enforcement social services and a network of volunteers that spanned 12 states. Ruby graduated high school at 17 a year early. She was headed to pre-law at Nebraska State, already planning her path to becoming a prosecutor who specialized in protecting children. Mason and Carter were 13, tall and strong, like their father had been. They had started helping with the Foundation's youth outreach program, talking to kids who had been through trauma, showing them that survival was possible. Lily was 6 years old and called Hawk Uncle Vinny. She had no memory of the blizzard that nearly killed her, but she knew every story. She told them to her kindergarten class during show and tell, proud of the family that had saved her before she could remember. Walter Chen passed away peacefully in his sleep at 78. The Angels rode in formation at his funeral, 100 bikes following the hearse to the cemetery. His gas station became a permanent waypoint on the Foundation's network, staffed by volunteers who kept his memory alive. Grace and Hawk never married. They didn't need a piece of paper to know what they meant to each other. They built a life together, raised children together, fought battles together. They were partners. They were family. That was enough. On the 5th anniversary of the blizzard, the Foundation held a ceremony at the community center. Families who had been helped over the years gathered to share their stories. The media came finally telling the right story, not about bikers and violence, but about protection and hope. Ruby gave a speech that made everyone cry. 5 years ago, I was dying on the side of a highway. My baby sister had stopped breathing. My mother had collapsed in the snow. And a man I'd never met walked through a blizzard and said 2 words, "Take my hand." She looked at Hawk, who sat in the front row with Grace and her siblings. The Hells Angels brought my family back to life. Not just that night, every day since. They taught me that courage isn't about being strong. It's about being scared and doing the right thing anyway. They taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when you need them most. She paused, composing herself. My uncle is in prison for the rest of his life. My father's death has been avenged. And 300 families have been saved because a group of people decided that some things matter more than reputation, more than comfort, more than safety. She smiled through her tears. I'm going to spend the rest of my life continuing their work. Not because I have to, because I want to. Because I know what it feels like to be saved. And I want to give that feeling to as many people as I can. The applause lasted for 5 full minutes. Grace watched her daughter take her seat, watched Hawk put his arm around Ruby's shoulders, watched her twins cheer, and her youngest clap her little hands. She thought about the night it all began. The snow, the cold, the terror of watching her baby stop breathing. The headlights appearing through the white wall of death. The massive man who knelt beside her and breathed life back into her daughter. "Take my hand," he had said. She had taken it, and her family had lived. Not just survived, lived, thrived, grown into something stronger than she ever imagined possible. The ceremony ended. Families gathered for photographs. Children ran and played while adults talked and laughed. Grace stood at the edge of the crowd, watching it all with a full heart. Hawk appeared beside her. Thinking about something. Thinking about how different things could have been if you hadn't stopped that night, if the storm had been a little worse, if we had been a few minutes later. But we weren't. No, we weren't. She leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers. "Thank you," she said. "For everything. For all of it. Thank yourself. You did the hard part. We did it together." Hawk nodded. He looked out at the crowd, at the families who had been given second chances, at the children who would grow up safe because someone had chosen to fight for them. "Yeah," he said. "We did." Grace took his hand. The same hand that had reached for her through a blizzard 5 years ago. The same hand that had held her up when she couldn't stand on her own. "Take my hand," he had said. She never let go. And together they walked into the future, a future built on courage, forged in struggle, and sustained by a love that had found its way through the darkest storm.